Imagine you've just been hired to turn around a completely failing company. Do you fire the dead weight on day one, like massive layoffs all at once? Or do you slowly let people go over 6 months to try and, keep morale up?
It's a tough call, but 500 years ago, a disgraced political prisoner actually wrote a literal pragmatic formula for exactly how to execute people, or, in our case, fire them, to keep a population happy.
Yeah, today we're unpacking Niccolo Machiavelli. And not just the infamous treatise everyone thinks they know, The Prince, but also a fascinating, much lesser-known biographical sketch he wrote called The Life of Castruccio Castracani of Lucca.
It really is a remarkable stack of sources, and reading them together, the very specific theme emerges that completely challenges how we think about leadership today.
Okay, let's unpack this, because diving into these texts, what jumps off the page isn't just a list of political tricks. It is Machiavelli's absolute, undeniable obsession with the new prince.
Yes, exactly.
He is captivated by the disruptors, the founders, the usurpers, the political innovators. I mean, he spends almost zero time on kings who just inherit their thrones from their dad.
Right, they bore him.
They really do. He dedicates all his analytical energy to the people who have to build empires from scratch. And reading it, his new prince sounds less like a medieval monarch and much more like the ultimate disruptive entrepreneur of the Renaissance.
That is the perfect lens for this material. I mean, Machiavelli views inheriting a state as a largely passive act. The text points out that if you are a hereditary prince, he uses the Duke of Ferrara as his baseline example, you can be of a completely average ability and still survive.
Yeah, the system is already built.
Exactly. All you have to do is just not break the ancestral customs. The system runs entirely on inertia, but creating a new order, establishing a new principality.
That's a whole different game.
It is. Machiavelli views that as the ultimate test of human capability against the chaotic, destructive forces of the world, which he collectively calls fortune.
But, before we look at the founders who succeeded, we really need to understand the trap they are walking into. Machiavelli is brutally clear about why establishing a new system is so uniquely dangerous.
Oh, he paints a very grim picture.
He really does. He says there is nothing more difficult to handle or more doubtful of success than introducing a new order of things. And his reasoning for this is just devastatingly accurate about human nature.
Yeah, he basically identifies a two-front war for any innovator. First, the innovator has for enemies everyone who did well under the old conditions.
Which is obvious, right? If you introduce a new disruptive technology or push a major corporate restructuring, the old guard, the legacy companies, the entrenched middle managers, they are going to fight you with everything they have.
Because you are threatening their status and their wealth.
Exactly. But the profound insight is what he says about your allies. You would assume the people who benefit from your new system would be your most passionate defenders.
But Machiavelli argues the exact opposite. He says the innovator only has lukewarm defenders in those who might do well under the new conditions.
Lukewarm. That is such a piercing observation. It reminds me of pushing any kind of change in a community or a business.
Yeah?
The people who hate it are loud and organized,
Okay.
but the people who stand to benefit, the early adopters, they are fickle. They just don't want to stick their necks out.
And Machiavelli diagnoses exactly why they are lukewarm. It's driven by two psychological factors. The first is simply fear of the old guard, who still have the establishment, the laws, and the historical precedent on their side.
Right.
But the second factor is deeper. It's the natural incredulity of human beings. People do not truly believe in new things until they have had a long, tangible experience of them. We are just wired to doubt the new.
So if you're stepping into a situation where you are trying to innovate, you are essentially walking into a buzzsaw.
Yeah.
Your enemies are rabid, and your friends are just waiting on the sidelines to see if you survive.
Very much.
How on earth does Machiavelli suggest anyone actually pushes a new order through that kind of resistance?
Well, it requires a specific alchemy of two ingredients: opportunity and extreme personal ability. Machiavelli terms this ability virtù.
And we should probably clarify that term, right?
Yes, definitely. We have to strip away our modern understanding of that word. He does not mean virtue in the moral Christian sense of being good or pious. Virtù is drive, competence, adaptability, and sheer, unfiltered willpower.
And to prove how this works, he forces us to look at history's heavy hitters. He calls them the most excellent examples: Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, and Theseus.
The big names.
The biggest. But notice what he says about their success. He claims these ultimate founders owed nothing to luck or fortune except the raw opportunity.
Because opportunity in Machiavelli's worldview is just raw, unshaped material. Moses found the Israelites enslaved in Egypt. Cyrus found the Persians discontented with the Medes. Theseus found the Athenians dispersed and disorganized.
So the opportunity wasn't a stroke of good luck.
Not at all. The opportunity was a crisis, a vacuum. It was their virtue that allowed them to recognize that crisis and mold it into a new nation.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because molding that raw material requires something beyond just a great vision. To force a new order to stick, these innovators relied entirely on themselves, and crucially, they had the capacity to use physical force.
Yes, the arms.
There's a line in the text that just stops you in your tracks. He says, "All armed prophets have conquered, and the unarmed ones have been destroyed."
This raises an important question about the limits of persuasion. Machiavelli provides a contemporary counterexample to Moses and Cyrus, which is Fra Girolamo Savonarola.
Right, the friar.
Yeah, he was a Dominican friar who managed to briefly take control of Florence using nothing but his incredibly charismatic preaching. He introduced a strict new moral order, but he was an unarmed prophet.
And what happened to him?
The text notes that Savonarola was ruined the absolute second. The multitude stopped believing in his vision because he had no physical mechanism to compel them to keep believing.
Wait, I want to push back on this because it sounds incredibly cynical. Is Machiavelli really arguing that a brilliant idea, a totally noble vision that could genuinely help people, is just completely worthless if you don't have a weapon or a military to back it up?
Essentially, yes.
Can't the strength of the idea be enough?
Not according to his reading of human psychology. Machiavelli believes human nature is fundamentally variable. I mean, it is actually quite easy to persuade a crowd of a new idea in the heat of the moment. The difficulty is fixing them in that persuasion.
Keeping them on board when things get hard.
Exactly. When the initial excitement fades, when the reality of the new system gets difficult, people revert to their baseline skepticism. Therefore, an institutional founder must build a system robust enough that when the people inevitably lose faith, they can be made to believe by force.
Wow.
Vision without an enforcement mechanism is just a fleeting dream.
If we translate that to today, it's like having a brilliant concept for a tech startup, but having zero patent protection, zero capital, and no way to defend your market share.
That's a great way to look at it.
The second a giant legacy corporation decides to copy you, your beautiful vision is destroyed because you were an unarmed prophet in the marketplace.
That is a highly accurate modern parallel. You must have the leverage to enforce your new reality.
Okay, so the greatest founders rely on their own virtue and their own arms. But what about the people who try to skip the line?
Ah, the fast-growth empires.
Right, the ones who rise to power overnight because they got lucky or because they rode on the coattails of someone else's resources. Machiavelli compares these fast-growth empires to plants that shoot up overnight. They look impressive, but they lack deep roots.
And without deep roots, the first political storm will completely overthrow them. But Machiavelli does offer a caveat.
Which is?
A fast-growth empire can survive if the new prince possesses enough genius to lay those deep foundations immediately after acquiring power. Which brings us to his ultimate case study in the text Cesare Borgia, the Duke Valentino.
Borgia is the absolute poster child for skipping the line.
Yeah.
I mean, he acquired his state entirely through the fortune and the military power of others, specifically his father, Pope Alexander VI, and the French king.
He was handed everything.
Borgia didn't build his empire. He was basically handed the keys to it.
But Machiavelli doesn't dismiss Borgia. He actually reveres him because Borgia recognized his own vulnerability the moment he took power. He knew the mercenary armies he was using, specifically those commanded by the powerful Orsini family, were completely untrustworthy.
And Borgia's solution to this is chilling. He doesn't just fire the mercenary commanders. He outmaneuvers them.
A total trap.
Yeah, he lures the leaders of the Orsini faction to a meeting of reconciliation in a town called Sinigalia. He acts incredibly friendly, gets them inside his quarters, and then instantly has them seized and strangled.
In one move, he entirely eliminates the middlemen who could threaten his military independence.
So he solves the military problem. But then he faces a civic problem. He has taken over the Romagna region, which the text describes as totally lawless, full of robberies, factions, and violence.
It is a mess.
Borgia needs to bring order, but bringing order to a lawless place requires brutal, unyielding enforcement.
Which leads to one of the most wild cinematic stories in the entire book.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah, Borgia appoints a lieutenant named Ramiro d'Orco, who Machiavelli describes as a swift and cruel man. Borgia essentially hands Romero absolute power and tells him to pacify the region by any means necessary.
And Ramiro does it.
He does. He
Yeah.
cleans up the Romagna using extreme severity. But Borgia is a step ahead. He knows that the people now deeply hate Romero for all this brutality, and by extension, they are going to start hating Borgia for putting him in charge.
The psychological manipulation of what Borgia does next is staggering. To clear his own name and manipulate the emotions of the public, Borgia has Romero executed.
But he doesn't just quietly execute him.
No. He leaves Romero in the public piazza at Cesena, cut cleanly in half, with a wooden block and a bloody knife resting beside him.
That's quite an image.
It is the ultimate corporate scapegoat, but with medieval violence. It's exactly like a modern CEO who takes over a bloated company, brings in a ruthless hatchet man to lay off half the staff and do all the dirty work.
Yes.
And then once the restructuring is done and profits are up, the CEO publicly fires the hatchet man, acting outraged by their harsh methods, just to look like a hero to the surviving employees.
What's fascinating here is Machiavelli's analysis of the public's reaction. He writes that the barbarity of seeing Romero cut in half caused the people to be at once satisfied and dismayed.
Satisfied and dismayed.
Borgia provided them the peace they desperately wanted, blamed the trauma of achieving that peace on middle management, and then publicly destroyed the manager to avenge the people's suffering. It is a masterclass in psychological control.
And despite executing this flawless, ruthless playbook to build his roots, Borgia still loses everything in the end.
He fails due to what Machiavelli calls the extreme malignity of fortune.
Bad luck.
Extremely bad luck. Borgia fell deathly ill at the exact moment his father, the Pope, died. He had contingency plans for every possible political maneuver except having to face a massive succession crisis while he himself was physically incapable of getting out of bed.
But Borgia's actions, as violent as they were, had a cold, rational political logic. They were about establishing a secure, peaceful state. But reading this naturally makes you wonder about the limits.
Right, where's the line?
Exactly. Is any crime acceptable when founding a new system? Does Machiavelli endorse just pure, unadulterated evil if it gets results?
He actually draws a very distinct line, and he categorizes a different group of founders, those who gain power purely through wickedness.
Not virtue, just wickedness.
Right. He provides two historical examples, Agathocles, the Sicilian from the ancient world, and Oliverado da Fermo from Machiavelli's own era.
Agathocles is a wild story. He's a potter's son who rises through the military ranks. One day, he calls the Senate and the richest citizens of Syracuse together, pretending he wants to have a public debate.
A trap.
Another trap. And at a prearranged signal, his soldiers just slaughter all of them. He seizes the city in a morning. And Oliverado does almost the exact same thing centuries later.
To his own family.
Yeah, he's raised by his uncle. He writes to his uncle saying, I want to come home and show the town how successful I've been. The uncle throws him a massive, lavish banquet.
It's so dark.
Oliverado waits until the dinner is over, invites his uncle and all the civic leaders into a private back room for serious discussion, and has his soldiers murder his own family and all the guests.
It is sheer betrayal. And Machiavelli acknowledges that Agathocles, had immense courage. He even successfully fought off the Carthaginians later on. But notice the philosophical distinction Machiavelli makes here.
What does he say?
He states that Agathocles' barbarous cruelty and inhumanity mean he cannot be celebrated among the most excellent men. Machiavelli writes that his methods may gain empire, but not glory.
So what does this all mean? Because right after condemning them, Machiavelli introduces this deeply disturbing, almost clinical concept.
The economy of violence.
Yes. He says that cruelties can be properly used or badly used. Is he really arguing that there is a mathematical formula for how to use violence? That doing all your terrible deeds on day one is the secret to a long, peaceful rule?
He is absolutely arguing that, and it is rooted in a profound understanding of how human memory processes trauma. He explains that properly used severities are applied all at one blow out of necessity for security and then never repeated.
You alter the environment instantly.
Right. Badly employed cruelties are those that start small and multiply over time.
Meaning, you don't keep the knife in your hand.
Precisely. The psychology is that injuries must be done all at once so they are tasted less. The shock is overwhelming to the system, but the nervous system eventually resets, the shock passes, and people can begin to feel secure again if no further violence occurs.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
And conversely, he says benefits must be given little by little so their flavor lasts longer.
Think about the modern corporate equivalent. If a company needs to cut costs, the properly used cruelty is ripping the Band-Aid off. You announce a 20% workforce reduction on a Monday.
It's brutal.
It's traumatic. But by Friday, the survivors know they are safe and they can get back to work.
Exactly.
The badly used cruelty is the death by 1,000 cuts. You lay off 2% of the workforce every month for a year. You create a permanent, lingering state of anxiety and terror.
And Machiavelli says that chronic anxiety turns into hatred. And hatred is the one emotion a new prince or a new CEO can never survive.
It's an economy of violence.
Yeah.
If you have to disrupt the system, do it instantly, entirely, and then pivot immediately to providing stability and benefits.
That's the formula.
We've covered so many disparate elements of the new prince: the need for your own arms, the danger of the lukewarm defenders, the sheer willpower of virtue, the PR of violence. Did Machiavelli ever find someone who actually threaded this needle perfectly?
Well, that is where the second source in our stack comes in. This biographical sketch of Castruccio Castracani.
Castruccio.
Castruccio is essentially Machiavelli's theories made flesh. He isn't just a historical figure in this text. Machiavelli highly romanticizes his life to illustrate everything a founder should be.
And it starts with a classic mythic origin story. Castruccio is found as an abandoned baby in a vineyard by a priest's sister. He's literally pulled from the dirt.
Right.
The priest tries to raise him for the church to be a man of the cloth, but Castruccio rejects it the second he's old enough. He insists on a life of arms. He's driven entirely by his internal virtue.
He eventually rises to power in the city of Lucca, and his rise relies on something we haven't touched on yet: his profound ability to manipulate his environment.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
Castruccio doesn't just fight battles. He alters the physics of the battlefield to turn his enemies' advantages into fatal weaknesses.
The examples in the text are incredible. At the Battle of Savonarola, the Florentine army thinks they're just marching up a mountain pass to meet him in open combat.
But Castruccio is already there.
Exactly. He has secretly corrupted the commander of a fortress at the very top of the pass. He takes the castle the night before, hides his men, and waits. The Florentine cavalry gets completely bottlenecked on this steep, narrow path.
I can't maneuver.
They can't retreat. And Castruccio unleashes a devastating ambush from above.
And he repeats this environmental manipulation at the Battle of Fucecchio. He positions his army with the river Arno between him and the Florentines. But instead of defending the riverbank, which would be standard tactical doctrine, he leaves a wide open space to tempt the Florentines into crossing.
He practically invites them over.
He does, because he knows the river is deep with mud. The heavy Florentine cavalry with all their advanced armor gets bogged down. Their horses are rolling over in the water.
It's a disaster for them.
A complete disaster. At that exact moment of maximum vulnerability, Castruccio sends in his light infantry, armed only with javelins and bucklers, to attack the knights while they are trapped. He completely neutralizes the enemy's massive technological and financial advantage simply by using the mud of the river.
It's the perfect metaphor for a disruptive founder. You don't fight the legacy monopoly on their terms, you change the terrain so their size becomes a liability.
Exactly.
And Castruccio secures his political state at home using the exact same ruthless pragmatism as Borgia. He wipes out rival families. He literally builds a fortress in Lucca, using the stones from the towers of the enemies he has executed.
It's highly symbolic.
Very. But the text also highlights how sharp and witty he was. He understood the transactional nature of human beings. There's this great moment where a flatterer lets Castruccio spit on him and tries to justify his lack of dignity by saying, "Fishermen let the sea saturate them to catch a little fish. I let myself be wetted by spittle to catch a whale."
Castruccio respects the hustle, but he sees right through it. He understands exactly what motivates the people around him.
But for all of this absolute brilliance, for all his perfect virtue, his story ends in complete tragedy.
It always does with fortune.
Right after his greatest tactical victory at Fucecchio, he's standing at the city gates, covered in sweat, welcoming his troops back. He catches a fatal chill from a cold wind coming off the Arno River. He dies of a fever at age 44.
Just incredibly unlucky.
And in his dying speech, he looks at his heir, Pagolo, and he laments that he is leaving behind an empire that is vast, but fundamentally insecure because he simply didn't have enough time to consolidate the foundation.
And true to Castruccio's dying prediction, Pagolo lacks his adopted father's incredible virtue. Within months of Castruccio's death, Pagolo loses Pisa, he loses Pistoia, and he barely manages to hold on to Lucca itself. The empire just evaporates.
Wait, I really struggle with this conclusion.
How so?
If Castruccio is the ultimate innovator and he builds this incredible system from nothing, but it falls apart the absolute second he dies because his successor isn't a singular genius. Doesn't that prove the entire new prince model is fundamentally flawed?
Hmm.
If a system relies entirely on one brilliant founder to function, isn't it a terrible system?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have just articulated the ultimate tragedy of the new prince in Machiavelli's worldview.
Yeah.
The paradox of the founder is that the very traits required to build a new empire, the restless ambition, the military brilliance, the paranoia, the absolute ruthlessness, are the exact opposite of the traits required to build stable, lasting institutions.
Well, that makes sense.
An innovator disrupts, but institutions require administration. A system built entirely on the shoulders of one exceptional genius cannot survive a mediocre successor. And history, unfortunately, is mostly populated by mediocre successors.
It's a really sobering thought. So to bring all of this together, what Machiavelli is telling us is that inheriting a system is passive, but building a new one requires an agonizing, dangerous mix of perfect timing, calculated ruthlessness, and an incredible ability to navigate the psychological resistance of the old guard.
It's not for the faint of heart.
Not at all. If you are listening to this and you are trying to implement a new order, maybe you're stepping into a new management role tomorrow or pushing a new initiative in your community, you are going to face the exact same human dynamics that Machiavelli diagnosed 500 years ago.
You really are.
You will face the lukewarm defenders, the hostile legacy players, and the desperate need to establish deep roots before the first storm hits.
The methods of combat may have moved from the battlefields of Renaissance Italy to the boardrooms of modern corporations, but the underlying psychology of change, the fear, the incredulity, the need for decisive action, that does not alter.
Which leaves us with one final, very famous metaphor from chapter 25 of The Prince. Machiavelli compares fortune, luck, chaos, the unpredictable nature of the world, to a raging, destructive river.
A great metaphor.
When it overflows its banks, it tears down trees, destroys buildings, and sweeps everything away. When the flood comes, everyone simply yields to it.
But, and this is his ultimate point, in fair weather, when the river is calm, men have the agency to build dams and dikes and barriers, so that when the flood inevitably returns, the water is channeled, and its destructive force is neither so unrestrained nor so dangerous.
So here is a thought to take with you. If fortune controls half of our actions and the other half is up to our own virtue, maybe the true legacy of a new prince or any great innovator isn't the shiny new empire or the disruptive product they built, because that can vanish the moment they leave.
Right.
Maybe the true legacy is the invisible barriers, the resilient systems, and the solid foundations they leave behind. The infrastructure that protects the rest of us from the chaos of the future long after the architect is gone.